Take a deep breath and let your mind settle. Tonight, you'll drift into a calm space, surrounded by the quiet sound of a gentle voice, the warmth of an imagined campfire, and the rhythm of history slowly unfolding. As the soft crackle of fire meets the still air, you might begin to feel your eyes grow heavier, your thoughts slowing, as if the world itself is beginning to fall asleep beside you. Before we begin, from which country are you listening tonight? What time is it where you are? Maybe it's late, and the night is quiet around you. Before we travel back in time together, if you enjoy peaceful stories like this one, you can gently tap the like button, subscribe, and share a small comment below. It helps more sleepy minds find a calm place here. Close your eyes. Imagine a time when the world was quieter. The wind moved slowly across endless white plains, and almost every sound was softened by snow. This was the Earth during the last ice age, when glacier covered vast parts of the planet, and the air itself seemed frozen in place. Nights were longer, the stars brighter, and the cold never truly went away. Humanity lived close to the edge of survival, surrounded by a landscape carved by ice. The first thing you would notice, if you stood there, is the silence. A deep, ancient quiet that fills every valley and stretches across every frozen field. The kind of silence that makes your own heartbeat sound loud. The kind that softens your thoughts until even time feels slower. The wind would touch your face, sharp but clean, carrying a scent of ice and stone. There were no engines, no buildings, no voices of machines, only the breathing of the earth itself. The world was raw, untouched, and humbling in its stillness. People who lived then didn't rush. Every movement was careful, every moment deliberate. They walked through snow that reached their knees, wrapped in furs that smelled of smoke and earth. The cold demanded patience. And in that patience, humanity learned how to listen, to the land, to the wind, and to one another. A soft reminder, as you listen, this story isn't about heroes or kings. It's about survival, the quiet kind, the kind that happens between heartbeats, in the space between fear and warmth. And maybe, as you breathe slowly now, you'll feel a little of that patience too. Fire was the center of everything. It was more than warmth. It was protection, light, and comfort. Imagine the glow of orange flames against the wall of a cave, the sparks gently rising into the dark, the sound of crackling wood mixing with the wind outside. The people of the Ice Age would gather close to it, speaking softly or not at all, letting the silence fill the space between words. The cold outside was a living thing. It pressed against every surface, crept into every breath, waited beyond the light of the fire. But inside those small circles of warmth, people learned a kind of peace. They learned that comfort is not found in abundance, but in togetherness. Each night, as snow drifted quietly across the land, families would rest under layers of hide and fur. They could hear the low howl of the wind through cracks in the rocks, the distant groan of ice moving somewhere unseen. And yet, there was calm, the kind that only exists when one has already accepted the cold as part of life. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it now, that rhythm of life at the edge of the world. The flicker of the fire, the breathing of people asleep, and the steady pulse of nature's patience. The land itself looked endless. Mountains of ice rose where cities would someday stand. Rivers were trapped beneath sheets of frost, and sunlight shimmered across them like silver glass. The earth seemed still, but beneath the ice, it was alive, slowly changing, preparing for what would come. Humanity was small compared to the vastness of nature, but that smallness was not weakness. It was awareness. People knew how fragile warmth was, how precious light could be. They lived humbly, taking only what they needed, and in that restraint, they survived. Another soft reminder, as you rest your body and let your thoughts drift, remember that calm often lives in simplicity. The world you imagine now, silent and white, is not empty. It's full of quiet lessons that move slowly, just like the glacier themselves. The stars above those ancient skies were the same stars we see tonight, unchanging, steady, and patient. To the people below, they were silent witnesses, not objects of worship, but markers of time, guiding their journeys through the frozen dark. The same light that reached them still reaches us, passing through generations of night. Somewhere, deep in that ancient cold, a mother whispered to her child beside the fire. Perhaps she spoke of the morning hunt, or of the snow that would fall by dawn. Her voice was soft, rhythmic, blending with the crackling wood. That sound, human warmth against an endless winter, is what defined the world of the Ice Age more than the ice itself. The cold did not end them. It shaped them. It taught them to listen, to move carefully, to respect the balance of life. In that frozen silence, humanity learned something eternal, not about power, but about peace. As you continue to listen, notice how your breathing has slowed. Your body feels heavier, your thoughts quieter. You've stepped into a world where time moves at the pace of snow falling. You're safe here, wrapped in the calm of history's oldest silence. As the firelight flickered, shadows danced across the cave walls. Those patterns told silent stories, not written, not spoken, but remembered. Perhaps they traced the shapes of animals once hunted, or the outline of distant mountains. In the glow of that small fire, humanity found the first form of storytelling, a quiet reflection of the world outside, captured in the movement of light and shadow. When the wind grew stronger, people would listen, not in fear, but in respect. The sound of howling air across the plains was both warning and lullaby. It told them that the world was vast, that the cold ruled beyond their shelters, and that every moment of warmth was a gift. The ice did not only freeze the land, it shaped the rhythm of their thoughts. Each morning began slowly. The fire would fade to ash, and someone would stir it back to life. The smell of smoke and frost mixed in the air. Outside, the horizon glowed pale blue, and the first light of the sun reflected off endless snow. The world looked calm, untouched, and impossibly wide. People stepped carefully, following footprints from the day before. Every path mattered. Every mark in the snow was memory of where they had been and where they hoped to return. Their connection to the earth was direct, simple, and pure. They lived not above nature, but within it. Every few hours, they would stop to rest, crouching behind rocks to block the wind. Their breaths became small clouds, fading quickly into the air. They spoke little, not because they had nothing to say, but because words were unnecessary when silence carried its own meaning. The world during that time was both dangerous and beautiful. Glaciers shone like mirrors, catching sunlight that turned to silver dust in the air. When storms rolled in, snow swallowed the sky, and people waited it out in silence, their hearts steady, their minds focused on endurance. To survive meant learning the language of the land. The crunch of ice beneath a foot, the creak of a frozen tree, the soft hum of wind through distant rocks, all of it spoke to them. These were signs, signals of when to move, when to hide, and when to rest. By night, they would return to their fires. Sparks rose and disappeared into the dark like small stars. Their faces glowed in the light, their shadows stretching across the stone walls. It was in these quiet moments that humans learned what it meant to belong, not to a place, but to one another. Sometimes, far in the distance, a rumble of ice breaking could be heard. A glacier shifting, a reminder that even the frozen world was never truly still. Beneath the surface, rivers flowed, hidden and patient, shaping the land for the future. The earth was alive, always changing under the will of the Almighty, who set nature's balance into motion. There was no rush, no need for tomorrow to arrive faster. Every sunrise was enough. The light might have been weak, but it was real, and it meant another day to breathe, to eat, to live. To them, life itself was an act of gratitude, a quiet endurance against the cold. You can almost imagine sitting beside them now, feeling the warmth of the fire on your hands, the cold on your back, the soft hum of wind beyond the cave entrance. The world outside is harsh, but inside, there's peace, a peace found in small things, like shared food or the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Somewhere in that frozen land, snowflakes drift endlessly, each one different, each one temporary. They fall, melt, and vanish, yet together they shape mountains and valleys. Much like people, small and fleeting on their own, yet powerful in unity and patience. Softly, another reminder, you don't need to hold on to every thought. Let them drift, like snowflakes, light and silent. Each one will settle where it should. The Ice Age people didn't fight the cold. They learned to live with it. Perhaps that's what we learn from them, how to find peace inside what we cannot change. As night deepened, the stars returned, countless and bright, filling the sky with quiet light. The people of that time looked up, not seeking meaning, but feeling wonder. Under those same stars, they drifted to sleep, their fires burning low, the world outside breathing slowly beneath the ice. And as you listen now, under your own sky, you too can rest, knowing that history, like the snow, moves softly, and that even the coldest worlds can hold warmth within. There was a silence that covered everything, not the kind that follows noise, but the kind that has existed forever. It was deep, wide, and almost heavy. The Ice Age world was wrapped in that silence, stretching across continents buried beneath snow. The air held its breath, and even the smallest sound felt sacred, as if it might disturb something ancient. Across what would one day be Europe and North America, glacier rose higher than mountains, shimmering beneath a sun that offered light but little warmth. The ground was hard as stone, and every step echoed through the cold air like a small reminder of life's fragility. Each breath turned to mist, curling upward before vanishing into the pale sky. In this great white world, the color of life was faint, a hint of brown earth beneath the frost, a shadow of grey where ice met rock. The landscape seemed endless. To stand, there was to feel both peace and insignificance. The horizon never moved, and the quiet stretched farther than sight itself. The wind was the only voice that spoke. It hummed through the frozen valleys, whispering between cliffs of ice. Sometimes it roared, carrying tiny grains of snow that stung the skin, but even then, it was the sound of a living world, a world that spoke without words. When night fell, the silence grew even deeper. The snow reflected the faint light of the moon, turning the ground into a soft mirror. The stars above burned sharp and bright, their reflections scattered across the ice. It was as if the heavens themselves had been caught and frozen beneath the earth's surface. People living then understood the silence. They didn't try to fill it. They moved gently, speaking only when necessary, saving their voices for warmth, for prayer, or for teaching. Their lives flowed in rhythm with the quiet, a harmony between patience and purpose. Every sound mattered. The crack of a branch might mean an animal nearby. The groan of shifting ice could warn of danger. The flutter of firewood collapsing into embers was a small song of comfort. The world trained them to listen closely, to hear meaning even in stillness. When a storm passed through, it wasn't violent in the way we imagine. The snow came in waves, soft at first, then heavier, until everything blurred. People waited, knowing the sky would clear again. They trusted the rhythm of the earth, for it had never failed them before. The land was full of memory. Each layer of snow hid a story, of a hunt, a shelter, a lost footprint. Beneath the ice lay the traces of rivers, the bones of animals, and the seeds of forests yet to come. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the slow work of creation. For those who walked this frozen world, time felt different. A single day might stretch endlessly. A single fire might mean survival through a week of storms. And yet, within that slowness was a kind of peace, a steady heartbeat beneath the weight of cold air. Occasionally, the sun would break through a thin layer of cloud. Its light spread across the snow like gold dust, too weak to melt anything, but strong enough to remind them that warmth existed. The people lifted their faces to it, eyes half closed, not worshipping, only grateful for what the Almighty allowed them to feel. In the distance, the horizon shimmered. Heat and ice bent light into illusions, shapes of mountains that didn't exist, or lakes that vanished when approached. The earth played its slow tricks, blending reality and dream. Perhaps that's why stories were born here, told in whispers beside the fire, half memory and half imagination. When food was scarce, they turned to the skills that patience had taught. They followed the paths of herds, reading marks in the snow like a map. A single set of tracks could guide them for days. Every decision was careful, every step measured. They lived not in haste, but in awareness. Sometimes, when the wind stopped completely, the silence became so deep it felt alive. People would pause, hearing nothing, not the air, not the snow, not even their own movements. In that stillness, they could feel the pulse of the earth beneath their feet, steady and vast. It was a reminder of how small humanity truly was, and how miraculous survival could be. And when night returned once more, the firelight glowed in small shelters scattered across the frozen world. From afar, they would have looked like tiny sparks clinging to the edges of an ocean of white. Each spark was a sign of life, a quiet defiance against the endless silence, a small warmth glowing beneath the sky of ice. When dawn arrived, it did so gently, as if the sun itself was hesitant to disturb the snow. The light spread slowly, a thin silver hue that touched the tips of frozen hills and drifted across the plains. Shadows faded into the brightness, and the still world began another quiet day. People emerged from their shelters, faces hidden behind fur, eyes squinting against the white glare. Every movement was unhurried. Life had taught them that haste wasted energy, and energy meant survival. The world they stepped into was vast and featureless. Distances were difficult to judge, and the air shimmered faintly, making the horizon appear to dance. The snow beneath their feet crunched softly, a sound that echoed far beyond what eyes could see. The air carried no scent, no birdsong, no insects. Only the occasional call of a distant animal reminded them that they were not completely alone in this frozen expanse. Sometimes they followed the trails of mammoths, deep grooves pressed into the ice, leading toward valleys sheltered from the worst of the wind. These tracks promised food, hides, and bone for tools. But they also carried danger. Every hunt demanded courage, unity, and respect for the life taken. For them, the world was not an enemy to conquer, but a teacher that required humility. Each success was met not with celebration, but with gratitude to the one who sustained all life. The silence had its own rhythm. It was not empty, but full of soft, unspoken patterns, the beating of hearts, the sighing of the wind, the quiet settling of snow on stone. Even when nothing moved, the world seemed to breathe. To live in such stillness meant learning how to listen inwardly, how to find calm in repetition, and how to see beauty in simplicity. The Ice Age taught that peace often hides in plain sight. At night, the wind returned, whispering through the cracks of shelters. It carried with it the memory of distant mountains and frozen seas. People wrapped themselves tightly in hides, faces buried for warmth, while the fire pulsed faintly beside them. The light from the flames flickered on walls of bone and stone, creating shapes that moved like memories, perhaps of the day's journey, or of ancestors whose footsteps once crossed the same snow. On rare nights, the sky would come alive. Curtains of green and blue light, the northern lights, shimmered above the ice, dancing in complete silence. People would stop what they were doing, lift their eyes, and watch. The lights swayed like reflections of unseen oceans, mysterious and calm. No one knew what caused them, but all felt awe. It was a beauty that asked for no explanation, a reminder of the greatness of creation. During the day, the horizon glowed white, but beneath the ice, rivers moved unseen. Slowly, persistently, they carved new paths, shaping valleys for generations to come. The world changed in silence, without witness, without hurry. It was as though the earth was dreaming beneath its frozen blanket, preparing for spring that would take centuries to arrive. Those who lived in that age accepted change as part of life. They did not expect comfort or control. They understood that the Almighty set balance in everything: warmth and cold, hunger and fullness, light and dark. The Ice Age tested that balance every day, but it also reminded humanity that patience was its greatest strength. In the coldest times, faith in survival became a form of quiet prayer. When food was scarce, they adapted. They stored dried meat, cracked frozen bones to reach the marrow, and melted snow for water. Every act was deliberate. Every movement mattered. Yet, in that routine, there was a strange peace, a comfort in knowing what must be done, and in doing it together. The silence of the Ice Age was not loneliness. It was togetherness without noise. As years passed, generations were born into the frost. Children grew up knowing snow as their first playground and fire as their first teacher. They learned to read the sky, to sense storms, to track the animals that sustained them. They laughed softly, played quietly, and dreamed beneath the same stars that we see now. The white world around them was harsh, but it also held wonder in every direction. Even in their quiet lives, art found its place. On the smooth walls of caves, they carved and painted what they saw: herds of mammoths, running deer, wild horses. The drawings were simple, but full of meaning. They were not decorations. They were memories, reminders of existence in a world where everything faded so quickly into snow. These images whispered through time, telling us that beauty can survive even in silence. Sometimes, the silence was broken only by a single sound: the fall of ice, the crack of a frozen river, or the distant call of wolves. Each sound echoed through the air like a reminder that the earth was still alive. Even in stillness, the world moved. Even in cold, life found a way to endure. The Ice Age was not only about survival, it was about learning harmony with creation's slow heartbeat. When storms passed, the land looked newly born. Smooth layers of snow erased footprints and covered every mark of struggle. The past disappeared beneath fresh white, giving each day the illusion of beginning again. To those who lived there, that was comfort, the earth itself teaching them forgiveness and renewal through its quiet cycle. In the heart of that frozen world, silence became something sacred. It held not fear, but understanding. It allowed space for gratitude, for reflection, for the smallest sparks of warmth to feel immense. As night fell once more, the wind slowed, and the world settled into its endless rhythm. The fires burned low, eyes closed, and dreams wandered across the snow. In that great white silence, humanity slept, not defeated, but at peace, waiting for dawn to rise once again. The cold could take nearly everything: food, strength, comfort, but not the fire. Fire was the heart of life during the Ice Age. It was the single, glowing thread that tied humanity to warmth, safety, and hope. When the world outside froze silent and still, the gentle sound of crackling would become a melody of survival. Inside the dim shelters, that small circle of light meant one more night of peace beneath the endless snow. Each fire began as a whisper of smoke, coaxed to life by trembling hands. Sparks danced against the air, fragile and bright, before growing into flames that licked at the darkness. The people gathered close, the orange glow painting their faces in shifting warmth. For a moment, the cold world beyond vanished. The cave walls shimmered like copper, the air thick with the scent of smoke and animal hide. Here, time slowed, wrapped in the rhythm of breathing and flame. The shelters of the Ice Age were not grand. Some were caves deep within mountains, their walls scarred by wind and age. Others were built from bones of mammoths, covered in thick hides to keep out the wind. Every stone, every branch, every strip of fur was used with purpose. There was no waste. The Almighty had provided, and humanity learned to use His gifts wisely. In those small, dark places, life continued, quietly, patiently. Imagine the sound inside one of those shelters: the low hum of fire, the faint crack of burning wood, the quiet sigh of someone stirring in their sleep. Outside, snow pressed against the walls, muffling everything, turning the world soft and distant. Inside, the air shimmered with heat, and shadows danced slowly along the ceiling. The contrast was almost poetic, the warmth of life surrounded by the cold of creation. Fire was not only heat, it was companionship. Families gathered around it each night, sharing the last of their food, telling simple stories with few words. They spoke softly, letting silence fill the gaps. Children watched the flames as if they were alive, eyes heavy with drowsiness. The warmth, the glow, the rhythm of voices, all became part of a nightly ritual of peace before sleep. The firelight changed everything it touched. The bones and stones around it glowed golden. The faces of those gathered seemed softer, more human, their expressions calm after a day of endless cold. In that small light, they remembered the comfort of being together. The flames reflected in their eyes, flickering like memories of the sun. When the night was calm, People watched the fire as if it were alive. The flames bent and twisted like dancers, each spark a moment of light against the dark. They saw patterns in the smoke and listened to the way the wood crackled. The fire seemed to speak, not with words, but with rhythm, reminding them that even small things could carry great meaning. Occasionally, someone would reach toward the fire, not to touch it, but to feel its warmth radiating through the cold air. Their hands hovered above the light, soaking in life itself. Fire gave more than heat, it gave confidence. It made them believe that survival was not only possible, but within reach. Outside, snow continued to fall, layer upon layer, soft and endless. The world slept under its white blanket, while inside, small groups of people stayed awake, wrapped in furs, their faces lit by the fire's pulse. The quiet between them wasn't emptiness, it was peace. The kind of peace that only comes when danger and safety share the same space. In the earliest hours of morning, when the fire began to fade, someone always stirred. With careful movements, they fed the flames again, a piece of wood, a handful of dried grass, a patient breath. Slowly, the glow returned, pushing back the darkness. It was a ritual repeated countless times, one that connected every generation through the same simple act of keeping light alive. As dawn approached, the faintest blue light crept through cracks in the shelter walls. Smoke drifted lazily toward the ceiling. Outside, the air was still cold enough to sting, but the people within had warmth to carry them through the day. They rose quietly, careful not to disturb the sleeping. The fire, once fierce, now burned low, steady, humble, and faithful. A soft rhythm filled the air, the sound of breathing, the shifting of hides, the whisper of wind just beyond the walls. The world outside remained vast and unforgiving, but within those fragile shelters, there was a kind of stillness that words could not describe. The fire had done its work. It had given them warmth, light, and rest. As the day stretched on, the people ventured into the pale light. The air outside was sharp and dry, biting at any skin it could find. Smoke from the morning fire drifted behind them, leaving a faint trail in the still air, a sign of where warmth had lived for a short time. The frozen plains lay ahead, quiet and white, but the memory of the fire stayed with them. It was more than heat. It was a promise waiting to be rekindled when night returned. Inside the shelter, evening brought the same familiar ritual. The fire was built with care, each step a practiced motion passed down through generations. Sparks rose again, catching the dried moss, and slowly the flames returned. The orange glow filled the darkness, painting the walls with moving light. In that soft radiance, the frozen world outside felt distant, almost forgotten. The night settled around them like a thick blanket. Beyond the walls, the wind whispered softly, brushing against the hide coverings. Inside, laughter was rare, but smiles were not. They didn't need many words to feel connected. The fire spoke for them, every flicker and crackle a kind of language, quiet but understood by all. Sometimes, when the night grew colder, someone would wake to feed the fire again. The sparks caught the air, tiny embers floating like orange stars before fading. Each time the flames rose, they brought not just heat, but comfort, reassurance that morning would come again. It was a fragile cycle, but one that held the essence of life itself. Every shelter held its own quiet world. No two were the same, but all shared the same scent of fire and hide, the same warmth of human breath. Beyond the walls, the world was harsh and wide, but inside, the distance between people disappeared. The fire drew them close, its light softening every edge, every fear, every doubt. As the night deepened, sleep came naturally. The people lay near the fire, its fading glow reflecting in their closed eyes. The flames no longer roared, they whispered. A soft crack, a gentle sigh, a final shimmer of light before the embers turned to ash. Outside, the cold continued its slow reign, but inside, there was peace. The stillness that followed was not emptiness, but rest. The air felt thick with quiet gratitude. The fire had given all it could, and now the night took over, calm and patient. The snow outside drifted down in silence, each flake settling softly, adding to the endless white that shaped their world. In the faint light before dawn, someone always stirred. A few glowing embers remained, faint but alive. With a small breath and a handful of dried moss, the fire would awaken again, not as bright as before, but steady enough to begin another day. The cycle of warmth continued, fragile but unbroken. As morning finally touched the horizon, smoke rose gently into the air once more. The people stepped outside, greeted by a sky painted in pale blue and silver. The cold met their skin again, sharp and familiar. Yet inside their hearts, the memory of fire lingered, quiet, eternal in its lesson. In the world of ice and silence, light did not last forever. But as long as there was one spark left to tend, hope would never fade. They were not so different from us, the people who walked the frozen world long before history was written. They breathed the same air, felt the same ache of hunger, and sought the same warmth that comforts every heart. In the endless white silence of the Ice Age, they built lives that were simple, deliberate, and full of quiet strength. Their story is not one of conquest, but of endurance, a calm, steady will to keep living under the cold hand of creation. Each morning began the same way. The pale light of dawn crept through cracks in the shelter walls, touching faces still soft with sleep. Breath turned to mist, rising into the cold air before fading. There were no clocks, no rush to begin the day. Time moved with the rhythm of nature, slow, unhurried, and patient. They rose only when the light told them it was time. Clothing was made from what the earth provided. Furs of reindeer, hides of mammoth, and threads made from sinew wrapped around their bodies like armor against the cold. Every piece was sewn by hand, shaped carefully, sometimes passed down through generations. They didn't see luxury in such things, only survival. Yet within that survival was artistry, the quiet pride of making something that kept life within reach. Men and women shared the work of endurance. The hunters tracked animals through the snow, reading the land like a story written only for those who understood it. The gatherers searched the frozen ground for roots, bark, or berries hidden beneath layers of ice. Every task mattered. Each person's effort became part of the tribe's heartbeat, slow, steady, and necessary. When they walked together. A group of families might travel for days across open plains, following herds of mammoths or bison. They left little behind, only footprints that would vanish by morning beneath the wind. Their homes were wherever warmth and food could be found. The world itself was their dwelling, and they moved through it with respect, never taking more than they needed. They understood the land not as an enemy to defeat, but as a teacher to follow. The snow spoke through its patterns, the sky through its color, the wind through its direction. They listened to all of it. The Almighty had created balance in the world, and they knew their survival depended on honoring that balance. Every mistake was costly, every act of wisdom, a gift. Children grew up watching and learning, not through lectures or commands, but through imitation. They studied the patience of their elders, the focus in a hunter's eyes, the calmness of those who built shelters from almost nothing. Childhood was short. The lessons of survival began early. But there was beauty in that simplicity, a rhythm to life that asked for awareness, not rush. When food was plentiful, they shared. When food was scarce, they endured together. No one lived in isolation. The Ice Age was too vast, too harsh, for selfishness to survive. Generosity became instinct, and cooperation was a quiet rule written in the heart of every person. Even in hunger, they found strength in unity. Their tools were simple, but perfect for their world. Spears carved from wood and stone, blades sharpened with care, cords braided from fibers or tendons. Each object told a story of hands that understood purpose. There was no waste, no excess, only precision, shaped by the need to continue. Theirs was not an age of invention, but of perfect balance between human thought and nature's design. When they hunted, they did so with patience and respect. Every step was measured, every breath silent. The animals they sought were massive, creatures of strength and endurance, not easily taken. A successful hunt meant survival for many. They used everything: meat for food, bones for tools, hides for warmth. Nothing was discarded, for all came from the same source of life. At night, when they returned from their work, their faces carried the marks of cold and wind, but their eyes held calmness. They gathered by the fire, eating in silence or sharing quiet words. Their days were long, their rest brief, but their peace was deep. They lived not with the illusion of control, but with acceptance of how small humanity truly was beneath the endless sky. There were moments of laughter too, gentle and fleeting, like sparks rising from a fire. Children played with bones turned into toys, their laughter muffled by the snow. The adults smiled, not loudly, but softly, as if afraid to disturb the night. Even in a world of cold, joy still found a way to live. Sometimes, in the middle of winter, storms would confine them to their shelters for days. Outside, the wind roared, the ice cracked, and the world disappeared into white. Inside, they waited. They spoke quietly, repaired tools, and tended to the fire. Waiting was not a burden, it was life. In stillness, they found patience. In patience, they found peace. A reminder echoed through every generation. Survival was not about strength alone. It was about understanding the rhythm of creation, when to move, when to rest, when to listen. Their wisdom came not from dominance, but from harmony. They lived with the land, not above it, and that made their endurance remarkable. As night fell, the firelight once again drew everyone close. The glow reflected in their eyes as they stared into the flames, seeing more than light, seeing memory. They knew that each day survived was a blessing. Each breath, a quiet act of gratitude. In the frozen stillness, surrounded by the vast, white silence of the world, the people of the ice found warmth not just in fire, but in the nearness of one another. The nights were long during the Ice Age, but they were never truly empty. When the stars spread across the sky, the people would sometimes step outside their shelters and look upward. The heaven seemed endless, a vast sea of light stretched above the frozen world. The stars were steady, guiding their journeys, helping them measure time. They watched in quiet awe, not seeking to command the sky, but to understand it, a calm recognition that the same power governing the heavens also shaped the earth beneath their feet. In the stillness of those nights, their thoughts often drifted to the mysteries of creation. They did not need to explain everything to feel wonder. The world was both harsh and beautiful, full of danger and yet overflowing with signs of mercy. The snow reflected the moonlight like glass, turning every shadow into silver. Each breath of cold air reminded them that life, though fragile, was sustained by will and patience. By morning, the cold returned like a familiar visitor. The people rose quietly, their movements deliberate, careful not to waste energy. They checked their tools, packed small bundles of food, and prepared to face another day. They knew that to live here meant to move, not out of restlessness, but of necessity. The earth required motion, and those who stayed still too long risked being claimed by the cold. When the hunt began, the group moved as one. They followed the tracks of great beasts, mammoths, bison, or reindeer, across the plains. Every step mattered. A single wrong sound could scatter the herd, and the effort of many days would vanish into snow. They spoke only through gestures and glances, their communication as silent as the world around them. This harmony between people was their greatest tool, stronger than any weapon they carried. A successful hunt was not a moment of pride, but of gratitude. When an animal fell, they paused in quiet respect, acknowledging that life was taken so others could live. The balance of creation demanded awareness, that all things had their time, and that survival was not victory, but continuation. Each part of the animal was used, the meat for food, the hide for warmth, the bones for tools, the sinew for thread. Nothing was wasted, for nothing was truly theirs to own. Back at the shelter, the air filled with the scent of roasting meat and burning wood. The fire crackled, and soft voices rose in the dim glow. Children listened to stories of ancestors, not heroes of war, but of endurance and wisdom. Tales of those who found shelter in storms, who crossed rivers of ice, who waited for the sun through endless winter. These stories taught that patience and gratitude were the truest forms of strength. In the deep cold, time blurred. Days and nights folded together like layers of snow. The seasons shifted slowly, and the people learned to read them. The tilt of light, the movement of herds, the feel of the wind. To them, the world was a great book written without words, and every sound, every shadow, was part of its message. They did not live long by our measures, yet their lives were full. Each sunrise was a reason to give thanks, each fire a reminder of hope. They understood that life's value was not in its length, but in its gratitude, in knowing the warmth of another's hand, the comfort of shared silence, and the peace that comes from living with purpose. Some nights, when the fire burned low, they would carve small shapes from bone or ivory, figures of animals, or the curve of a hand, or lines that mark the moon. These were not idols, nor objects of worship, but memories captured in form. They were reminders of what they had seen and learned, of the creatures that walked beside them, and of the patience that bound them to the world. During great storms, when no one could venture out, they used the time to repair, to mend, and to remember. They scraped hides smooth, sharpened tools, and sang softly to pass the long hours. The wind howled outside, shaking the walls of the shelter, but inside, there was order, quiet, steady, human. The fire became their center again, the single heartbeat of warmth against 1,000 miles of cold. Through years and generations, they moved from valley to valley, always following the rhythm of the land. Sometimes they returned to places they had known before, places where bones of old fires still lay buried under the snow. They built new fires over the same ashes, connecting themselves to the ones who came before. Time did not erase them. It folded them into the landscape, like breath fading into frost. Their wisdom was not written down, but lived. They knew that the earth gives and takes, that life requires humility, and that no one truly stands alone. They looked upon the frozen horizon and saw not despair, but continuity. Each step forward was faith, not blind hope, but trust that the Almighty who shaped the cold also placed warmth within their hearts. As the Ice Age slowly began to change, as the world warmed and the glacier began to retreat, their way of life too began to shift. Forests crept back across the plains, rivers broke free, and new lands appeared. Yet, even as the world softened, the lessons of the cold remained, lessons of patience, balance, and quiet gratitude. When the night returned, and the stars once again hung above them, the people of the ice sat by their fires, silent and calm. The world outside was still immense, but inside the glow of that fragile light, they felt something eternal, not the flame itself, but the peace it represented. For even in a land of endless frost, they had found warmth in one another, in the earth, and in the quiet mercy of endurance. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, survival was never a solitary act. Every life depended on another, a shared breath, a shared flame, a shared effort against the cold. The people of that age knew that endurance came not from strength alone, but from companionship. In the endless white world, togetherness was warmth. Without it, even fire would fade. Families moved like small constellations across the snow. They carried what they owned, hides, tools, dried food, wrapped tightly and shared among them. No one walked ahead for long. The strongest led when needed, but all understood that a group could only go as far as its slowest member. Their pace was patience itself, a rhythm of care in motion. When storms swept across the plains, they gathered close. Shelters were built side by side, walls of bone and hide pressed against the wind. Inside, families huddled together beneath layers of fur, listening to the howling world outside. A child might cry softly, a mother whispering comfort in the dark. The firelight flickered over tired faces, reminding everyone that even in struggle, they were not alone. The bond between people was not formed through words, but through acts. One shared food when another went hungry. One carried a child when its mother's hands were full. One kept the fire alive while the rest slept. These small gestures built a quiet strength, stronger than the fiercest storm. It was not heroism, only humanity. When the hunt began, they moved as a single body. Each person had a role: trackers, watchers, hunters, gatherers. The hunt was not a test of power, but of unity. Every movement depended on another, and every mistake could mean loss for all. The success of one was the survival of many. Their eyes spoke more than their mouths ever could. In a world where silence protected life, glances replaced words. A nod meant readiness. A raised hand meant weight. The tilt of a spear, the look toward the horizon, all became a language shaped by trust. It was communication without sound, understanding without need for speech. The cold taught them the value of presence. To be near another person was comfort, even when nothing was said. The body heat shared between two sleeping figures could mean the difference between life and death. In that closeness, a kind of peace grew, a wordless recognition that survival was a shared journey. Animals, too, became part of that companionship. Wolves lingered near the camps, drawn by the scent of fire and meat. At first, they were cautious, circling in the dark, their eyes reflecting the light like small flames. But over time, humans and wolves began to understand one another, both hunters, both survivors, both seeking warmth in a cold world. Perhaps it began with scraps of food left near the fire, a piece of bone tossed aside, a silent truce, night after night. Slowly, trust formed, the first fragile bond between two species shaped by the same need to endure. The wolves watched, listened, learned, and humans, too, began to see them not only as threats, but as mirrors of their own struggle. As seasons passed, the relationship deepened. Some wolves followed the people on hunts, alert to scents and danger. In return, they received food and shelter near the fires. The line between wild and companion blurred, and something remarkable began to grow: loyalty. In that loyalty, the first spark of friendship between humankind and animal took form. Children were the first to play with them. A wolf pup, left behind or orphaned, might wander near the camp. The child, curious and kind, offered it a scrap of meat. The pup stayed, trembling at first, then resting beside the warmth. That small moment, a child's patience, a creature's trust, became the quiet beginning of companionship that would one day shape the world. For these early people, the animals around them were part of the same creation. They hunted them for food, but they also watched them with respect, learning how to track, how to move, how to survive. The wolf, the mammoth, the bison, each taught lessons written in the snow. The Almighty had given every creature its place, and humanity found wisdom in their behavior. When night fell, the wolves often lingered near the firelight, their shapes barely visible against the dark. Their howls carried across the plains, long, low, and haunting, but not threatening. To the people listening, those sounds became familiar, almost comforting. It was a voice of the wild, reminding them that they were never truly alone in the vast silence. Over time, wolves that stayed close began to change. They grew calmer around humans, their movements less fearful. They accepted food directly from human hands and guarded the camp from other predators. The relationship was simple but profound, a silent partnership built on shared survival. Both had found something in the other that the cold world could not take away. In the quiet of those frozen nights, the bond between man and animal deepened. The fire burned low, the snow fell softly, and in that stillness, two forms of life, one human, one beast, shared the same warmth, the same breath, the same fragile moment of peace beneath the stars. It was companionship born not from need alone, but from understanding, a reflection of what it meant to survive together in a world made of ice and silence. As winters deepened and years passed, that bond between humans and wolves slowly reshaped the rhythm of life. The wolves began to follow their human companions not just for food, but for belonging. They moved with the hunters during the day, padding silently beside them across the snow, and returned at night to sleep near the fire. Their breath mingled with the smoke, their eyes reflecting the same light that kept both species alive. The humans had gained more than protection. They had found loyalty in the heart of the wilderness. These wolves were not pets, they were partners. They guarded the camps, warned of danger, and helped track game through the blinding snow. They became the watchers of the dark, the ears of the night. In return, the people shared warmth, food, and trust. This companionship was quiet, wordless, and powerful, a sacred balance of need and gratitude. Both species learned that survival was gentler when shared. When storms raged and visibility vanished, the wolves would sit facing the wind, their fur heavy with frost, their eyes steady. Humans stayed close, taking comfort in their calmness. Together, they listened to the storm roar and fade, two creatures bound by instinct and endurance. The people believed these animals had been placed near them as a mercy, a reminder that even in the harshest creation, there existed connection and kindness. By the dim light of fire, people sometimes shared scraps of food with their companions. The wolves would take them carefully, never biting, always watching. Trust grew not in leaps, but in moments, one meal, one glance, one night at a time. The children would fall asleep beside them, small hands resting on thick fur. The warmth of the animals became a living blanket, the kind that comforted more deeply than words ever could. These wolves, the earliest ancestors of dogs, began to live between two worlds. They were still creatures of the wild, yet drawn toward the steady presence of human warmth. Their eyes no longer held only hunger, but something quieter, recognition. Perhaps they, too, had learned the value of companionship, of finding safety beside another who understood the struggle to survive. In the soft glow of the firelight, the sight of a wolf resting beside a person became a symbol of harmony. Neither ruled the other. Both depended on one another to live. It was the beginning of trust that would echo across ages, carried forward by generations of shared survival. And though these people could not have known it, they were shaping one of the oldest friendships on Earth. The presence of wolves changed the way people saw the world. They became more aware of the land, more cautious, more observant. The wolves taught them to read the snow, to notice the faintest track, the smallest shift in scent, the way silence could mean danger. These lessons became part of human instinct, woven into the rhythm of hunting and travel. During long migrations, wolves often walked ahead of the group, their bodies cutting paths through the snow. They scouted terrain, marked trails, and returned to guide the humans forward. They seemed to sense direction in a way no map could offer. For the people, this was not coincidence. It was providence, a quiet form of guidance sent through nature itself. When the tribes rested, the wolves curled up near the outer edge of the camp, forming a living wall of watchfulness. Their ears twitched at every sound, their noses lifted to test the air. Inside, the humans slept deeply, knowing their companions would keep them safe. That sense of shared duty created a peace stronger than fear, the kind that comes when trust replaces uncertainty. The people also kept companionship among themselves, bonds just as vital as the one shared with the animals. Elders taught patience and craft. Hunters shared food with those too weak to walk. Children learned from the quiet cooperation that bound their families together. These ties were the heart of their strength, a web of care that kept them alive through every season. At times, groups met others traveling the plains, distant tribes, familiar faces from summers past. There were exchanges of goods, greetings, or sometimes quiet acknowledgments from afar. Rarely was there conflict. In a world that demanded cooperation to endure, peace was more valuable than pride. They understood that the true struggle was not between people, but between warmth and cold, life and frost. As years passed, the relationship between humans and animals deepened further. The wolves' offspring grew alongside the children of the tribes, learning each other's patterns, sharing play and protection. They became guardians of camps, friends of travelers, and symbols of companionship that went beyond survival. Together, they wrote the first chapter of a bond that would last beyond the Ice Age. Even the smallest acts of kindness carried meaning. When a traveler fed a hungry wolf, or when an animal warned of danger unseen, it reminded them that mercy, in all its quiet forms, was part of existence. The cold could harden bodies, but it could not harden hearts that had learned to share. The Almighty had placed compassion even in the most frozen corners of creation. As the world slowly began to thaw, as the snow retreated and the wind softened, those bonds did not melt with the ice. The people moved into new lands, carrying with them the descendants of those first companions. Together they stepped into a changing world, one built on the lessons of patience, loyalty, and shared endurance. And when night returned, even in warmer places, the fire still burned, and beside it lay the familiar silhouette of a wolf, no longer wild, no longer stranger. Two beings resting side by side, watching the same stars that had guided them through centuries of cold. Theirs was not just a story of survival, but of harmony, proof that even in a world of ice, warmth could be found in the company of another living soul. Long before cities, before iron or written words, the earth belonged to giants. Across the frozen plains of the Ice Age, enormous shapes moved slowly through the snow, creatures so vast that their steps shook the ground beneath them. Their breath rose like mist into the pale air, and their shadows stretched across valleys of white. These were the mammoths, the woolly rhinos, the towering bison, and the fierce saber-toothed cats. They were not monsters of legend, but real beings that shared the same world as the first humans. Together, they lived beneath the cold sun, their survival intertwined with the frozen land. The mammoths were the rulers of this world. Covered in long, thick fur and crowned with great curved tusks, they wandered in herds, feeding on dry grass buried beneath the snow. Each one weighed as much as a small house, yet they moved with a quiet grace. Their tusks were not only tools for survival, used to dig through ice and fight off predators, but also symbols of strength and endurance. To see a herd of mammoths crossing a frozen valley was to witness the heartbeat of the Ice Age itself. For the hunters, these giants were both awe and necessity. One successful hunt could feed a tribe for weeks, but it came with great risk. To face such a creature meant standing before nature's power made flesh. The people moved carefully, studying the herd from afar, learning its rhythm and direction. They waited for the right moment, when one mammoth strayed or fell behind. There was no cruelty in their intent, only survival. Each life taken was treated with respect, a gift from the Almighty through the balance of creation. Beyond the mammoths, other creatures roamed the frost. The saber-toothed cat, sleek, strong, and patient, was both hunter and rival. Its long fangs gleamed like ivory blades, a reminder that the world was not kind to the careless. Bison herds thundered across plains of ice, shaking the ground with the weight of thousands. Woolly rhinoceroses plowed through the snow, their horns breaking paths where none existed. The earth was alive with motion, every creature adapted to the demands of endless winter. At night, when the fires burned low and the stars glittered above, people could sometimes hear the distant trumpeting of mammoths echoing across the plains. The sound was deep, ancient, and haunting, a reminder that humanity was not the master of this world, but a guest within it. The giants walked freely, their migrations following the hidden patterns of the earth. To live among them was to live within the rhythm of creation, where strength and fragility existed side by side. Each animal played a role in the balance of the Ice Age. When mammoths dug through snow to uncover frozen grass, they opened paths for smaller animals to feed. When wolves followed bison herds, they kept the weak and sick from suffering long. Even the death of a giant returned life to others, scavengers, birds, and the frozen soil itself. The people observed this quiet order and learned from it. They understood that survival depended not on dominance, but on harmony with what was already designed. In the glow of the fire, stories of these giants filled the quiet nights. The elders spoke softly, describing how mammoths would cross rivers of ice and how their tusks could lift trees like twigs. They told of encounters where the ground trembled and hearts pounded, of hunts that became memories passed down for generations. Yet their tone was never one of fear, only wonder. They knew that to live among such beings was a rare and sacred test of patience, courage, and respect. The children listened wide-eyed, their imaginations painting pictures in the firelight. To them, the mammoth was more than a creature. It was a symbol of endurance, a teacher of survival. They learned that strength alone was not enough. Even giants fell if they did not move with wisdom. The elders would end their stories with quiet lessons, that every being, no matter how great, depends on the same warmth and balance that sustains all life. When the hunters finally found a fallen giant, a mammoth trapped in deep snow or weakened by age, they approached with reverence. They spoke little, working in silence under the grey sky. Every part of the animal was used. The meat was divided and preserved. The tusks became tools, weapons, or ornaments carved with care. The bones formed the frames of shelters, their curved shapes becoming walls against the wind. Nothing was wasted, because everything had purpose. The people understood that these creatures were not their enemies. They were companions in the grand struggle against the cold. The same snow that froze human skin also covered the mammoth's back. The same storms that threatened the tribe also scattered the herds. In that shared hardship, there was a strange kinship, an unspoken recognition that all life was bound by the same fragile thread of endurance. Far across the plains, herds of reindeer and musk oxen followed the seasons, moving south as the ice crept forward, then north again when the sun returned. The people followed them too, walking the same ancient paths. Their movements echoed one another, humans and beasts tracing the same lines across the earth. It was a dance of necessity, a slow, endless migration guided by instinct and by faith in the rhythm of nature. Sometimes, the tribes found themselves surrounded by herds so vast that the horizon seemed alive. The sound of hooves and breath filled the air, blending with the wind. In those moments, the world felt immense and complete, a living tapestry woven by the hands of the Almighty. The hunters stood still, watching, humbled by the sight of creation in motion. It was beauty born from survival, a harmony too great to disturb. In the heart of winter, when storms buried the plains and silence returned, the giants still endured. Beneath layers of snow, they found food, they sheltered their young, they waited for light to return. Their patience was a lesson written in movement. Just as the people relied on fire, the giants relied on memory, an ancient knowledge of how to survive the turning of seasons. Each breath they took was a reminder that life could persist even when the world seemed frozen beyond hope. For the people of the ice, these giants were both the measure and mirror of their existence. Watching them taught lessons of humility and endurance that no fire or tool could match. The people did not dream of ruling the earth. They dreamed of lasting upon it, as the mammoth did, strong and steady beneath the snow. The giants became part of their stories, their art, and their sense of belonging to something greater than themselves. And when night came again, when the wind swept softly through the frozen grass, the people would listen to the distant rumble of hooves or the deep cry of a mammoth calling to its herd. Those sounds carried through the darkness like the voice of the earth itself, ancient, slow, and full of calm strength. They closed their eyes beside the fire, knowing they shared the same world with these giants, and that in the long story of creation, both beast and human were simply trying to endure another winter together. As centuries passed, the bond between humankind and the giants of the Ice Age deepened in the rhythm of necessity. The people did not merely hunt them. They followed them, learned from them, and patterned their lives after their migrations. When the mammoths moved toward the valleys to escape harsh winds, so too did the tribes. When the herds turned north with the spring thaw, the people followed their trails, finding new rivers, new pastures, and new hope. The giants became the map of life, their journeys carving invisible paths of survival across the earth. The mammoths' movements shaped the world in ways unseen. Their heavy steps broke the snow crust, allowing new plants to grow when the sun returned. Their tusks dug through frozen soil, uncovering roots and seeds that would later feed other creatures. Each action of these immense beings helped sustain the cycle of life. The people understood this and viewed the giants not as beasts to conquer, but as partners in existence, quiet workers of creation, guided by the same divine balance that governed the stars above. Yet even giants are not beyond time. The climate shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Winters grew shorter, and summers lingered longer than before. Rivers that once froze solid began to move again beneath thin layers of ice. Grassland spread where once there was endless snow. To the people, it seemed the earth was breathing differently. The herds began to move less, their numbers shrinking quietly. The great mammoths that once filled the horizon started to fade into memory. When one of these mighty creatures fell to age or exhaustion, it was as if a piece of the world itself had ended. The people gathered around in silence. They gave thanks, not in ritual, but in reflection, for the life that had provided them warmth and nourishment. As they worked, they spoke softly, as though not to disturb the stillness left behind. For them, the mammoth's passing was more than a hunt completed. It was a reminder that even the strongest must one day return to the earth from which they came. The saber-toothed cats, once feared and admired, too began to vanish. Their prey grew scarcer, and the warming land no longer favored their way of life. The bison moved north, the reindeer changed their routes, and the balance that had held steady for ages began to tilt. The people noticed, though they could not yet understand the scale of what was happening. They felt it in their bones, in the changing rhythm of the seasons, in the silence that began to replace the sounds of the great herds. The loss of the giants did not happen overnight. It was a long, slow fading, a soft turning of one chapter into the next. The mammoths wandered into fewer lands each year. The great woolly rhinos disappeared into the mist of memory. The people who had once depended on them adapted once more, shifting their diets, their tools, their traditions. In their hearts, though, the memory of those immense creatures lingered, carried through stories whispered beside the fire. Elders told tales of a time when the earth trembled with the march of herds. They spoke of the wisdom of the mammoth, of its calmness in storm and patience in hunger. These were not myths meant to glorify. They were lessons meant to preserve understanding. The giants became symbols of endurance, teaching that survival was not about conquering nature, but living within its boundaries. In the evenings, when the fire flickered low, children would listen to these stories, eyes wide with wonder. They would imagine the ground shaking beneath the feet of thousands of animals, the sky filled with their breath, the air thick with snow and sound. They would ask if such creatures still lived somewhere beyond the mountains. The elders would smile softly and say, perhaps once they did, and perhaps, in some quiet corner of the world, their spirits still walk. The memory of the mammoth became woven into art. People carved its shape into bone and stone, tracing the arc of its tusks with reverence. These carvings were not decoration. They were memory, a way to keep the presence of the giants alive in the world of men. Each curve, each line was a quiet act of remembrance, as though to say, we saw them, we lived among them, and they will not be forgotten. Even the land carried their legacy. The trails they carved into the earth became riverbeds. The grasslands they shaped became homes for new life. The people did not see extinction, they saw transformation. The Almighty had designed the world to change, and in that change was both loss and renewal. Just as fire fades and returns, so too does life shift form across the ages. As the world warmed, forests crept into the plains where the herds once roamed. Trees whispered where ice had ruled. Birds filled the sky where once only snow had fallen. The people learned new ways of living, fishing rivers instead of hunting mammoths, gathering roots and berries where glacier had melted. But the lessons of the giants remained carved into their memory. Move with the world, not against it, and always walk with patience. When night came, and the stars returned as they always had, the people still felt the presence of the great beasts. Sometimes, in the distance, the wind carried a deep sound, the echo of thunder or the groan of shifting ice. In those moments, they imagined the mammoths walking again, vast and slow, crossing the frozen horizon. And in that imagination, there was comfort. For the people of the ice, the giants were never truly gone. Their tusks might have vanished, their herds may have thinned, but their story continued, in memory, in stone, in the wisdom passed from parent to child. They had walked beside them through the coldest age, learning endurance, respect, and gratitude. The giants had shown them what it meant to live humbly within creation's great design. And so, when the world grew warmer and the snow began to fade, humanity carried those lessons forward. The patience of the mammoth, the strength of the bison, the stillness of the saber-toothed cat. The giants had left their mark not only on the earth, but on the hearts of those who had walked with them. And as the fire crackled under softer sky, their memory still lingered, a quiet echo of a time when both beast and man faced the cold together and found peace in simply enduring. Above the endless white plains, the sky stretched vast and unbroken, a dome of cold light that seemed to watch over everything. During the Ice Age, the heavens were a constant companion to those who walked the frozen earth. With no smoke from cities, no glow of firelight beyond the camp, the stars appeared clearer and closer than we could ever imagine now. On quiet nights, when the wind rested and the fire burned low, the people would look upward, finding comfort in that ancient canvas of light. The nights were long, sometimes stretching for half the day, and the sky became a map for survival. The stars were their compass, marking the directions through the plains and valleys. Patterns emerged, not yet constellations as we know them, but shapes remembered by hunters and passed down through generations. A curve of bright stars might mean the direction of migrating herds. A cluster near the horizon might tell when the season was beginning to turn. The sky was both a mystery and a guide. When the moon rose, it cast silver light over the frozen ground, turning every shadow into a painting of motion and stillness. The snow shimmered, the trees glittered with frost, and the firelight reflected softly on the ice. People sat silently outside their shelters, wrapped in furs, their faces pale under the moon's glow. They spoke little in those hours. It was enough to feel the quiet, to sense that they were part of something immense, the vast balance of creation above and below. In that stillness, the heavens seemed alive. The stars blinked like watchful eyes, steady and timeless. Sometimes, streaks of light crossed the darkness, meteors burning for moments before disappearing into the cold air. To the people of the ice, these lights were signs, perhaps reminders of the unseen power that shaped both the land and the sky. They did not seek to control such wonders. They observed them in awe and humility, finding peace in the order written above them. There were nights when the sky itself danced. Curtains of green and blue light, the northern lights, shimmered from horizon to horizon. They moved like breath, slow and graceful, flowing across the sky in waves. The people watched in silence, their fires dimming as all eyes turned upward. The light swayed and folded upon itself, painting the world with colors that seemed otherworldly. In those moments, even the cold felt softer, as if the heavens had lowered themselves to touch the earth. For the hunters who roamed the ice, the stars were more than beauty, they were survival. They learned which ones rose above certain mountains, which faded before dawn, and which pointed toward rivers hidden beneath the snow. They carried that knowledge not in books, but in memory, written in the patterns of the night sky. To them, the stars were not distant. They were companions, constant and faithful, guiding their every step across the frozen plains. The children learned these lessons early. They lay beside the fire, their faces warm while the air above their heads froze, listening as the elders traced the stars with steady fingers. They memorized shapes and stories that matched them, of herds that crossed the heavens, of hunters chasing eternal prey, of the balance between dark and light. These were not tales of worship, but of remembrance, ways to understand their place in the grand design of the world. When clouds rolled across the sky, hiding the stars, the people waited patiently. They knew that nothing stayed hidden forever. The wind would clear the heavens again, and the stars would return, bright and familiar. That patience mirrored the rhythm of their lives, an understanding that both hardship and calm were part of the same cycle, as certain as the return of light after darkness. In the heart of winter, when days were shortest and nights seemed endless, the sky became a reminder of continuity. The same stars that shone above the ice had watched over generations before them, and would continue long after. Under their glow, time felt gentle and circular, not rushing forward but moving in slow, deliberate turns. The heavens carried the memory of everything, and the people below felt a strange peace in knowing they were part of that endless flow. On some nights, when the fire burned down to embers, the reflection of the stars appeared in the ice itself. It was as though the sky had descended into the ground, and earth and heaven became mirrors of each other. Those who saw it sat still for a long time, breathing slowly, their thoughts quieting until nothing remained but the rhythm of their own heartbeat. To see the stars reflected in the ice was to glimpse eternity folded within the cold. The wind carried whispers across the frozen valleys, soft as sighs. Sometimes it sounded like music, faint and fleeting, blending with the crackle of fire and the rustle of fur. The people believed that the wind carried the voice of the land, not to be feared, but to be heard. When they looked up at the stars, they often listened as much as they watched, as though the sky itself might answer through the wind's breath. There was a humility in the way they regarded the heavens. The people did not see themselves as rulers beneath the sky, but as caretakers of what had been given. The vastness above reminded them of their own smallness, but not in despair, rather in gratitude. They knew that every breath, every spark of fire, every glimpse of light was a sign of mercy in a cold world. That knowledge gave them calm, the kind that lingers even in hardship. Sometimes, a traveler alone in the snow would stop and look upward, seeking reassurance in the familiar patterns. The stars gave direction, yes, but they also gave comfort. They reminded every wanderer that they were never truly lost, that the same light shone above every camp, every home, every heart that waited in the dark. The sky connected them all, a quiet thread binding distant souls across the frozen world. The elders said that to understand the stars was to understand patience. Their light traveled across vast distances, crossing time and silence just to be seen. It was a promise written in the heavens, that even what seems far away still finds its way to us. Beneath that light, the people rested, trusting that what guided them above also guided them within. As dawn approached, the stars faded slowly, one by one. The black sky turned grey, then pale blue. The cold deepened briefly, the last chill before morning. People stirred, stretching their arms toward the first touch of sunlight. The stars disappeared, but their memory remained, glowing faintly in the heart like embers under snow. In the quiet between night and day, the world seemed to pause, caught in a perfect stillness beneath the endless sky above the ice. When the first light of dawn finally broke the horizon, it painted the snow in pale gold and blue. The people stirred from their rest, wrapping their furs tighter, eyes blinking against the light. The stars had retreated, but their presence lingered in memory, a quiet assurance that night would come again, bringing its calm and beauty. The sky above the ice was not just something to look at. It was a rhythm they lived within. Day and night, light and shadow, everything moved together in perfect balance. As the sun climbed higher, its warmth was faint but steady. It touched the glacier and made them glimmer like fields of glass. Tiny crystals drifted in the air, catching the sunlight and scattering it into soft rainbows. To the people, these moments were small miracles, gentle signs that even the coldest world could hold beauty when the light returned. They paused often to watch it, breathing quietly, feeling the thin warmth on their faces as a gift after long nights of darkness. The changing sky told them when to move, when to rest, when to prepare for storms. They had no need for clocks or calendars. They read the colors of the horizon, the height of the sun, the silence of the wind. The Almighty had given them a world that spoke without words, and they had learned to listen. Even a single cloud drifting from the north could tell a story, of approaching snow, of returning herds, of time itself shifting gently forward. At night, when the world froze again into stillness, the stars returned, brighter than ever. The people would sit quietly, wrapped in their furs, their eyes lifted to the heavens. They didn't name the stars the way we do now, but they remembered them like old friends, familiar lights that guided them across generations. The hunters, the mothers, the children, all shared the same view, all felt the same calm under the glittering dome of the sky. In the darkest months, the moon rose large and silver, turning the snowfields into oceans of light. Wolves howled in the distance, their voices long and lonely, echoing beneath the moon's glow. The people listened, not with fear, but with recognition. The wolves were not calling to them, they were singing to the same sky. In that shared sound, there was unity between human, animal, and creation itself, all beneath the same endless ceiling of stars. Sometimes, the sky offered wonders beyond understanding. The northern lights returned, brighter and stronger, painting the heavens in flowing waves of green and violet. The people would stop their work and stand in awe. The lights rippled and shimmered, moving like curtains in an unseen wind. Some said the lights were the sky remembering fire. Others thought of them as reflections of the oceans frozen far away. Whatever they believed, the feeling was the same: peace, smallness, and gratitude. When snow fell under starlight, it glowed faintly, a quiet illumination that blurred the line between heaven and earth. Travelers could walk through that silver world as though floating through a dream. The sound of footsteps was soft, the breath visible, the silence deep. The sky above gave no judgment, no demand. It only existed, vast, calm, eternal in its obedience to the order set for it. In that stillness, humanity found something close to serenity. The elders often said that the sky was a teacher. It taught humility in its vastness, patience in its constancy, and hope in its light. They told the young to always look up when they felt lost, for the same stars that watched over their ancestors still shone above them. Nothing under creation was truly new to the heavens, and that gave comfort in uncertain times. To know that the same sky had witnessed all things was to remember that life itself moved within a larger peace. Some nights, distant storms filled the horizon with flashes of pale lightning. The sound took time to reach them, a deep, rolling murmur that echoed across the plains. The people watched in silence, knowing that even thunder had its place in the balance of creation. The light that split the sky was brief, but beautiful. It illuminated the glacier, revealing their impossible size before fading again into black. It was as though the sky had briefly opened its eyes, then closed them once more. When clouds parted after storms, the stars appeared sharper than before, their light made stronger by the darkness that had come before. The people saw meaning in that too. That peace often shines brightest after hardship. It was a lesson they lived by, one written not in words but in the rhythm of their lives. Endure the cold, wait for the calm, and light will return. In the long silence between seasons, when days and nights blended into each other, the sky became a diary of change. The people noticed how some stars shifted slowly across the months, how new constellations rose and faded. They could not explain why, but they felt that everything, stars, snow, life, time, was moving in harmony, each part keeping its perfect place in the vast design of existence. When spring finally approached, the sky softened. The air carried the scent of thawing earth, and the light lingered longer each day. The people looked upward often, noticing the color of the sunrise, pale pinks and golds instead of the harsh blue of winter. It felt gentler, kinder. They did not celebrate loudly, but they felt gratitude, quiet and deep, for the sun's return. And still, even as warmth began to return, they did not forget the beauty of the cold sky. For in its silence, they had learned reflection. Beneath its light, they had found calm. Every star that shone above the ice had taught them patience, the kind of patience that shapes strength, not haste. The sky above had been both mirror and shelter, and its lessons would stay with them long after the snow had melted. When night fell again, they lay once more beside their fires, eyes half open, watching faint trails of light shimmer far above. They knew that beyond the world they could touch, there was stillness, a stillness vast enough to hold all their fears and hopes without a sound. And as the wind whispered softly over the plains, the stars continued their slow, eternal dance across the heavens, lighting the frozen world below with a peace older than memory itself. It began quietly, not with thunder or fire, but with softness. The cold breath of the world started to change. Snow that had once fallen endlessly began to melt a little sooner each spring. Rivers that had long slept beneath the ice stirred awake, whispering beneath the thaw. The world was not ending. It was transforming. The people did not yet know that they were witnessing the slow farewell of an age, the melting of the world they had always known. At first, the changes felt gentle. The air no longer cut as sharply against the skin. The light lingered longer on the horizon. Small streams appeared where none had been before, winding through the plains, reflecting the sky like mirrors of liquid glass. The people welcomed the warmth, though it felt unfamiliar. They stepped carefully across the softening ground, their boots sinking into mud where frost had ruled for centuries. For generations, they had known only the language of snow and wind. Now, new sounds began to join the silence, the trickle of water, the creak of ice breaking, the low hum of rivers forming again. It was music unlike anything they had ever heard, the earth itself awakening from its long sleep. Some felt joy, others unease. Change, even gentle, carried both promise and uncertainty. The herds were the first to understand. Mammoths, bison, and reindeer began to move differently, following the retreat of the ice northward. Their instincts guided them toward colder lands where grass still grew beneath frost. The people followed, as they always had, carrying their shelters, their tools, and their faith in the rhythm of nature. But each year, the ice retreated farther, and the familiar paths changed beneath their feet. The great glacier that had once shaped mountains and valleys began to shrink. Walls of ice, taller than trees, started to crack and fall into the sea. The sound was deep and echoing, a slow rumble that rolled across the horizon like distant thunder. The people heard it in the night, a reminder that even the strongest things must someday yield. To them, it felt as though the world was breathing differently, exhaling after an age of holding its breath. As the ice melted, the land transformed. New rivers cut through valleys, carving paths that shimmered in the sunlight. Forests began to grow where tundra had stretched endlessly. Small plants pushed through the soil, green and delicate. The air filled with the scent of life returning, of earth, of moss, of things once buried finding light again. The people looked upon it all with quiet wonder, realizing that creation itself was alive and moving. For the first time, they saw birds that had been gone for generations. Their calls filled the morning air, bright and echoing. Fish returned to the rivers that had been frozen for centuries. The world was learning to speak in a new voice, not of ice and silence, but of motion and renewal. The people watched carefully, unsure of what these changes would bring, yet aware that something greater than them was unfolding. But change carried loss, too. The familiar landscapes that had guided their ancestors vanished beneath new lakes and forests. Places of memory, hunting grounds, resting sites, the bones of fires long cold, were swallowed by water. The people grieved silently, not with cries, but with patience. They had lived long enough under the sky to know that nothing in creation stayed the same. The Almighty had written change into the world, and even the ice was not meant to last forever. The animals that had once ruled the frozen plains began to disappear. Mammoths grew fewer each year, their great herds breaking into smaller groups. Some grew weak, unable to adapt to the warmer seasons. The hunters found them less often, and when they did, it was with mixed hearts, gratitude for the meat, sorrow for the fading of a friend. They understood that this was not cruelty, but the quiet turning of time. With the coming warmth, the people also changed. Their shelters grew lighter, their tools smaller, their paths more winding. They learned to fish the thawing rivers, to gather roots and fruit from the softening earth. New skills replaced old ones. The rhythm of fire and frost gave way to a gentler balance, one that required listening not to the silence of snow, but to the murmur of water and wind. In the evenings, they still gathered around the fire, though the cold pressed less fiercely against their backs. They spoke softly of the past, of the long winters, of the giants that once walked beside them, of the deep skies filled with northern light. The children listened wide-eyed, half believing these stories were dreams. To them, the world of endless winter sounded almost like a legend. As the seasons shifted, the rivers grew stronger. The melting glacier sent waves of fresh water rushing toward the sea. Lakes formed where valleys had once been, reflecting the sky in soft blue and gold. The people learned to build new camps along the shores, watching fish leap and birds nest in reeds. Life, which had once hidden beneath the snow, now surrounded them in abundance. Yet there were moments when the warmth felt too strange, too sudden. The elders sometimes sat quietly at dusk, their eyes on the horizon where the ice still glimmered in the distance. They spoke little, but their silence carried the weight of memory. They had lived through both stillness and change, and they knew that every beginning carried an ending within it. The sound of melting ice was beautiful, but it was also farewell. Some nights, when the air cooled again, mist rose from the rivers and drifted through the valleys. It looked like the ghosts of glacier returning to visit the land they once ruled. The people watched, their fires glowing through the fog. They felt neither fear nor joy, only calm acceptance. The world was shedding its old skin, and they were part of that transformation. And in that understanding came peace. The people realized that they did not own the earth, they belonged to it. The melting was not destruction, but renewal. What froze would thaw, what lived would change, and what passed would leave room for new beginnings. As they lay beneath the stars, listening to the sound of running water where once there had been silence, they knew the world was not dying. It was simply learning to breathe again. As the centuries turned, the warmth continued to spread across the land. The ice that had once seemed eternal now existed only in memory and in the farthest reaches of the north. The earth began to reveal colors long hidden: greens of moss and pine, browns of wet soil, the deep blue of water unbound. For those who had lived through endless white, it was like waking from a dream. The world was alive again, full of motion and light, though quieter somehow, as if exhausted from its long slumber. The people adapted as they always had. The hunters became fishers, their spears traded for nets woven from plant fibers. The gatherers found berries and herbs where once there had been nothing but frost. New animals appeared: deer, boar, and smaller creatures that darted through the undergrowth. The rhythm of life changed with the landscape, yet the same patience and gratitude guided their days. They were still children of the ice, shaped by hardship, now learning how to live in gentleness. Forests spread across the once empty plains. Tall trees reached for the sky, their leaves whispering in the wind. The people watched them grow, astonished by the sound of rustling that replaced the endless silence of snow. Birds returned in multitudes, their calls echoing through the valleys. To ears that had known only the hush of winter, this chorus felt like a miracle. Each note was a reminder that the earth never truly rests. It only changes its song. Water flowed where ice had once carved deep scars into the land. Rivers twisted like veins through the soil, carrying the memory of the glacier that had shaped them. Lakes widened each year, catching the reflection of the sky. The people built small boats from tree trunks and reeds, learning to glide across the calm surfaces. They began to move differently, not by foot through snow, but by water, carried by the very force that had once been locked in ice. Sometimes, when they camped beside a great lake, they could still see pieces of ancient ice floating far from shore, fragments of the old world melting quietly into the new. The sight stirred both wonder and sadness. The children would ask what it was like when the world was frozen, and the elders would tell them of the silence, the stars, and the warmth of fire against the wind. These stories became lessons, so the memory of patience and endurance would not vanish with the snow. But there were changes that brought unease. As the land softened, new dangers appeared: floods where once there had been dryness, rains that lasted for days, rivers that grew wild and unpredictable. The people built higher shelters, learning to respect water as much as they had respected ice. The Almighty had changed the balance again, and they listened, understanding that adaptation was the true path to survival. The great herds of mammoths and reindeer that had once thundered across the plains were gone. In their place came smaller animals, faster and more elusive. The hunters learned to move differently, to track lighter prints, to live on less. They missed the giants of the cold, but they gave thanks for the new life that had come in their stead. Every age carried its blessings, though none stayed the same. In the warmer seasons, flowers bloomed along the riversides, small, bright, and fragrant. The people had never known such color. They wove petals into their hair and placed them near the fire, their scent mixing with smoke and earth. It became a quiet ritual, a reminder that beauty, too, was part of survival. Even the smallest things could bring comfort after the trials of winter. The skies changed as well. Clouds once heavy with snow now floated higher, lighter, shifting with golden edges at sunrise. The nights were softer, the stars dimmed slightly by the rising warmth of the atmosphere. Yet even under a gentler sky, the people remembered what it meant to endure. Their lives were slower now, but their hearts remained shaped by the memory of the cold, a quiet humility that the warmer world could not erase. As generations passed, the old stories became legends. The children listened, wide-eyed, as their elders spoke of the Ice Age as though it belonged to another world. They imagined mountains of crystal, rivers of frozen glass, beasts that breathed fog instead of air. These tales connected them to their ancestors, reminding them that comfort was never to be taken for granted. The warmth they enjoyed was not a gift without cost. It was born from the endurance of those who came before. The people began to settle longer in one place. The abundance of food allowed them to stay through entire seasons. They built sturdier shelters of wood and stone, shaping the beginnings of villages. Still, the memory of movement remained within them. They could not forget the old rhythm, the walking, the waiting, the listening to nature's signs. Even in peace, they carried the discipline of wanderers who had once followed the ice. In their gatherings, the songs changed tone. No longer did they sing only of survival, but of gratitude, for warmth, for light, for the turning of the world. They sang of rivers and trees, of children born under softer skies. Yet always, somewhere in those songs, lingered the echo of the frozen past, the sound of wind across ice, the strength it had demanded, and the unity it had inspired. When the elders gazed across the green horizon, they saw the reflection of a truth that had always been there. The world belongs to change. Nothing stays frozen forever, not even hardship. Just as the ice had once melted, so too did fear and struggle, replaced by growth and calm. They smiled, knowing that creation's wisdom lies not in stillness, but in renewal. And when night fell, and the wind carried the scent of blooming earth instead of frost, the people sat by their fires as they always had. They watched the stars and listened to the rivers flowing nearby. In that moment, they understood that the Ice Age had not truly ended. It had transformed. The strength, patience, and gratitude it had taught them still lived on in their hearts, glowing like embers beneath a softer sky. The world had melted, but its story remained, written not in ice, but in memory, in the rhythm of water, and in the calm breath of those who survived its silence. And as the fire burned low, the people closed their eyes, feeling the warmth on their faces, and whispered thanks for a world that, even in its change, never stopped teaching them how to live. When the ice was gone and the world grew gentle again, the people still carried the memory of the cold. It lived in their hands, in their careful patience, and in the quiet way they looked at the world. They no longer walked through snow taller than themselves, but the lessons learned in that frozen age stayed within them, lessons not of struggle, but of understanding. The Ice Age had shaped more than the land. It had shaped the human heart. The first lesson was simplicity. The cold had stripped life down to its essence: warmth, food, light, and companionship. In a world where every spark of fire was precious, they learned to value what was truly needed. Now, in the milder days, when rivers flowed and the forests grew thick, they remembered that happiness did not come from abundance, but from gratitude. The warmth of the sun on their faces was enough to remind them how far they had come. The second lesson was patience. In the world of ice, everything moves slowly: the glacier, the herds, even time itself. The people learned to wait, to trust in the steady rhythm of creation. They waited for the thaw, for the hunt, for the quiet return of spring. Patience was not a burden, it was peace. It taught them that all things come in their time, just as the light returns after the longest night. The third lesson was humility. The Ice Age had shown them how small they were against the vastness of the world. The storms, the cold, the endless skies, all reminded them that they did not rule the earth. They belonged to it. This humility stayed with them, even as the climate warmed and life became easier. They walked softly on the ground, spoke gently to one another, and gave thanks before taking anything from the land. Every morning, when they stepped outside and saw the mist rising from the rivers, they remembered the breath of the ice. They felt awe, not fear, or at how the Almighty had balanced life so perfectly. The same power that had once frozen the seas now made the flowers bloom. The cold had never been punishment. It had been a teacher, patient and wise, revealing the strength hidden in stillness. Around the fire, the elders spoke of endurance, the fourth lesson. They reminded the young that the body can withstand much when the heart stays calm. During the Ice Age, they had faced storms that buried the horizon, nights that seemed endless. Yet they endured, not because they were stronger than the cold, but because they learned how to live with it. They found warmth not only in flame, but in the closeness of others, in faith and in hope. The fifth lesson was unity. In the cold, isolation meant death. The people had survived because they stayed together, families, tribes, and neighbors moving as one. They shared what they had, no matter how little. They learned that kindness was not a luxury, it was survival. In the world after the ice, they still gathered close, even when food was plentiful, even when the nights were warm. They knew that no one was meant to endure alone. Each night, as the fire burned low and the stars returned, they spoke softly about these lessons. The elders told stories of the frozen plains, of mammoths that once walked beside them, of rivers that had slept beneath the ice. The children listened with wide eyes, imagining that silent world. Though they would never know it themselves, they carried its wisdom in their hearts, and knowledge passed through stories rather than scars. Sometimes, an elder would take a piece of ice from the river in early spring, holding it up to the firelight. "This," they would say, "is memory." The children would watch as it melted in the elder's hand, drop by drop, disappearing into steam. "It doesn't vanish," the elder would whisper. "It changes form. Like life. Like us." The cold had taught them that nothing truly ends. It only transforms. The sixth lesson was awareness. The people of the ice had learned to notice the smallest things, the way wind shifted before a storm, the faint tracks of a hair beneath snow, the glint of frost under moonlight. In that awareness lay safety and connection. Now, in the warmer world, they still paid attention to the rustle of trees, the current of rivers, the rhythm of their own breath. They had discovered that the world always speaks. One only needs to listen. Even joy had been shaped by the cold. The people who had endured it learned to celebrate the smallest comforts: a meal shared, a spark caught, a sunrise unclouded by storm. They carried that gratitude into every part of life. Laughter came softly, like wind through grass, but it was real and lasting. The memory of hardship had not made them bitter. It had made them gentle. The seventh lesson was balance. The cold had shown them that extremes never last. Not the deepest winter, not the fiercest hunger. Every storm eventually breaks. Every darkness gives way to dawn. They learned to live not in resistance to change, but in rhythm with it. The earth taught them that balance is not stillness, but harmony, the calm found between struggle and peace. In the warmth of the new world, these lessons became their inheritance. They passed them down through stories, through quiet actions, through the way they treated one another. They did not speak of the Ice Age as a tragedy, but as a teacher that had shaped the soul of humanity. The glacier had receded, but the wisdom they left behind flowed on, like rivers carrying melted snow toward the sea. At dusk, as shadows lengthened across the land, the people would pause from their work and look toward the fading sun. They saw its light touching forests, rivers, and mountains that had once been ice. They felt no longing for the past, only gratitude for having come through it. In the cold, they had learned how to survive. In the warmth, they had learned how to live. And so, even as the world softened, the lessons of the cold endured. They were not carved into stone, but carried in the heart, a reminder that patience, gratitude, humility, and unity are the truest forms of strength. For the people who had walked the ice, survival had never been about conquering nature. It had been about walking beside it, hand in hand with the quiet wisdom of the earth. As the generations passed, the memory of the Ice Age faded into the quiet rhythm of stories told at night. Yet its lessons remained like a pulse beneath the surface of life. The people no longer feared the wind, but they still listened to it. They no longer walked through endless snow, but they still honored its purity. They had learned that every hardship leaves behind wisdom, and that wisdom, once accepted, becomes gentleness. The cold had refined them, like stone polished smooth by time. The eighth lesson was gratitude in stillness. In the frozen world, stillness had been constant, not emptiness, but peace. There had been no need to fill silence with words, no rush to move faster than nature allowed. In the quiet, they had discovered reflection, the ability to see not only the land but themselves. Even now, when the rivers ran freely and the trees whispered in the wind, they sought moments of stillness. They would sit beside the water and remember how the cold had once taught them the beauty of quiet patience. The ninth lesson was strength in gentleness. The people of the ice had learned that true endurance was not born of force but of calm. The harshest storms could not be defeated by anger or defiance, only by steady acceptance. The strongest among them were those who could bend without breaking, who could forgive the cold for being what it was. And in their gentleness, they found resilience. The warmth of compassion had always been more powerful than the frost. Every night, before sleep, families still gathered around their fires as their ancestors once had. The flames flickered softly, illuminating faces both young and old. There was laughter, sometimes stories, and always a kind of silence that followed, a silence not of fear, but of peace. In that glow, they could almost feel the presence of those who had lived before them, sitting under different stars, wrapped in the same warmth. The fire had changed forms, but its spirit was the same, a light against the dark, a promise that endurance continues. The 10th lesson was remembrance. They understood that forgetting the cold would mean forgetting who they were. The Ice Age had shaped the way they saw life, as a fragile gift, temporary yet meaningful. So they kept its memory alive through their stories and songs. They spoke of patience when the world felt restless, of simplicity when greed tried to grow, of unity when hearts began to stray apart. The lessons of the cold became not only history, but guidance for living. When storms came in the warmer world, rains that flooded rivers or winds that tore at trees, they did not panic. They remembered how their ancestors had stood beneath blizzards and waited for the light to return. They built shelters together, helped one another, and endured with quiet faith. Each generation found strength in knowing that the same patience that had survived the Ice Age could survive anything. The world could change again, and they would still endure. Sometimes, during the coldest nights of the New World, frost would form on the grass. The people would wake to see a thin silver veil covering the land, glittering under moonlight. The elders smiled at this sight, whispering that it was the earth remembering, a gentle echo of what once was. The children would run their fingers through the frost, laughing softly, unaware that they were touching the last breath of the age that had made them. The 11th lesson was harmony. The Ice Age had taught that balance between taking and giving was sacred. To hunt, one must respect life. To build, one must honor the land. They lived by this still, never taking more than they needed, never wasting what creation had provided. The cold had shown them that greed destroys, while gratitude sustains. And so they moved through the world with care, their footprints light upon the soil. As the forests grew thicker and the rivers widened, the people felt both wonder and nostalgia. The world was abundant again, yet part of them missed the quiet clarity of the frozen plains. They understood that hardship had made them wise, that comfort, if not respected, could dull the lessons of struggle. So they taught their children not to fear difficulty, but to welcome it as a teacher in disguise. They built small places of gathering, circles of stone and fire, where stories of the cold were told with calm voices. These were not tales of suffering, but of gratitude. The listeners felt peace, not sorrow. The old ones spoke of the time when everything had been simple, the sound of wind, the glow of fire, the quiet bond between people and earth. In those moments, everyone understood that simplicity itself was sacred. At dusk, when the world turned golden, the people often watched the horizon in silence. The sky changed color slowly, just as it had during the Ice Age. The same sun that had once hidden behind clouds of snow now warmed their skin. They marveled at how constant creation remained, even as it changed. The light that had guided their ancestors still guided them, proof that everything moves in cycles, and nothing is ever truly lost. The 12th lesson was mercy. The cold had been merciless, yet it had also been fair. It gave equally, tested equally, and rewarded those who endured. From it, the people learned to treat one another with compassion, to judge slowly, to forgive quickly. Mercy had become their warmth when the fire waned, their strength when fear returned. It reminded them that even in a harsh world, kindness could grow like a spark against the wind. When they looked up at the stars, they no longer saw a distant sky, but the same heavens that had once glowed above the ice. The same constellations, the same silence, the same quiet hum of eternity. It comforted them to know that, through all the ages, the sky had never changed its rhythm. They were small beneath it, but not forgotten. They were part of its story, the same story their ancestors had watched unfold in the cold. The elders often ended their stories with this thought: the ice is gone, but its truth remains. And when the fire burned low and the night wrapped around them, the people felt that truth in the quiet. The lessons of the cold had not melted with the glacier. They lived on, in patience, in gratitude, in mercy, and in the calm understanding that even the harshest winters prepare the soul for the warmth to come. So they closed their eyes, breathing slowly, listening to the soft wind outside. The cold had once tested them, shaped them, and then released them into a gentler world. But its gift endured, the wisdom to endure all seasons with grace. And as sleep came, peaceful and deep, it carried with it the echo of the ice, not as a memory of suffering, but as a lullaby of strength, teaching them, even in dreams, how to remain still, humble, and kind beneath the ever-turning sky. When the Ice Age finally became memory, its presence did not vanish. It lingered, quiet and unseen, like breath on glass. The frozen world had melted, yet traces of it still whispered beneath the soil, in the curve of mountains, in the slow bend of rivers that once ran under glacier. The people who now walked the green earth carried its echo within them. They could feel it in the rhythm of the wind, in the calm between storms, in the stillness that lived beneath the surface of everything. The past had not gone. It had simply changed its voice. The earth itself seemed to remember. Beneath meadows of grass, ancient ice still slept, deep and unmoving. When the sun warmed the ground, faint mists rose, the last breath of the frozen world, rising to join the clouds. The land bore scars of its shaping, valleys carved by glacier, stones smoothed by time. Each contour of the earth was a line of its story, a trace of where the ice had once ruled. To those who listened carefully, the land still spoke in the language of silence. In the far north, remnants of that age remained, sheets of ice glimmering under pale skies, tundra that stretched into infinity, and winds that carried the same haunting sound that had once filled all the world. The few who journeyed there could almost hear it, the soft sigh of frozen air moving through time. It was as if the world itself was exhaling a memory too vast to forget. The people who lived in the warmer lands would sometimes find strange things rising from the earth: bones of mammoths, tusks curved like crescents, frozen roots from forests long vanished. They held them in their hands with reverence, knowing they were touching the past. To them, these were not relics of death, but messages from their ancestors, reminders of endurance, of balance, of the sacred relationship between humanity and creation. When they gathered around their fires at night, they still told stories of the cold. The elders spoke softly, their voices like wind moving through tall grass. They told how the world had once been wrapped in white, how people had survived by patience and unity. The listeners imagined it all: the shimmering skies, the long shadows of mammoths, the quiet strength of those who came before. And though the fire burned warm, they could almost feel the chill of that ancient air brushing against their skin. Sometimes, the people traveled north again, drawn by curiosity or memory. They found the remains of old camps, circles of stones that once held fires, fragments of tools carved from bone, the faint outlines of footprints preserved in frozen ground. When they stood among these echoes, they felt time fold inward. The distance between then and now disappeared, and for a brief moment, they were no longer strangers to the past. They were its continuation. The whisper of the past came not only from the land, but from within the human heart. Every time the wind howled through the trees, it carried a familiar tone, the same note that had once echoed across plains of ice. It spoke of endurance and silence, of beginnings and endings woven together. And though the people could not always hear it consciously, it guided them still, like an old melody playing quietly beneath new songs. The storytellers of each generation became keepers of that melody. Their words were gentle, their pace unhurried. They did not tell of conquest or glory, but of stillness, of the way cold teaches humility, of how silence deepens understanding. Their tales were not meant to excite, but to calm. They reminded listeners that the world was ancient, that everything they touched had once lived another life, under another sky. In some places, carvings on cave walls remained untouched by time. The paint had faded, Yet the shapes endured: lines of mammoths, reindeer, and people standing together beneath the stars. These were the earliest records of memory, made not to boast, but to remember. The people of the present would run their fingers along those lines and feel a strange closeness, as if the ones who had drawn them were still near, watching quietly through the dim light. There were also songs, simple, wordless melodies passed down through generations. No one knew their origins, but when sung beside the fire, they carried the same rhythm as the beating heart, the same rise and fall as breathing in the cold. Perhaps they were the oldest memories of all, shaped not by thought but by feeling. The melodies had no language, yet everyone understood them. They were the sound of memory itself, calm, slow, and endless. As time went on, even as new civilizations began to rise, the Ice Age did not fade from the soul of humankind. Its lessons became the foundation of wisdom, patience, humility, gratitude, mercy. These virtues outlasted stone and bone, traveling quietly through the generations. Every culture, every story that came after carried a spark of the same truth, that endurance and kindness are the purest forms of strength. The whisper of the past was not loud or demanding. It did not seek attention or praise. It existed like breath, constant, invisible, necessary. When people forgot to listen, it waited, patient as ever, knowing that someday they would remember again. And when they did, perhaps while standing beneath a quiet sky or touching the surface of still water, they would feel it rise within them, gentle and familiar. There were moments when the earth itself seemed to remember aloud. The cracking of frozen lakes in the far north, the deep rumble of shifting glacier, the slow drip of melting ice in hidden caves. These were the ancient voices of the world, speaking softly through change. Even the smallest drop of water falling from ice carried the story of ages, from cold to warmth, from silence to sound, from stillness to motion. In the warmth of the new world, where flowers bloomed and rivers sang, the whisper of the past gave contrast to the noise of life. It reminded the people that peace was found not in abundance, but in awareness, in slowing down, in breathing deeply, in remembering that all creation had once known silence. The cold had taught them that quiet does not mean absence. It means presence without demand. And so, though the ice was gone, the whisper endured, in the hush between heartbeats, in the stillness before dawn, in the slow drifting of clouds across the sky. It lived in the rhythm of nature and the rhythm of memory, reminding all who listen that the past never truly leaves. It only changes its shape, waiting patiently in the background, like snow waiting for winter's return. As the centuries unfolded, the whisper of the past softened but never disappeared. It lived quietly beneath every season, beneath every footstep across the earth. Even as cities rose and stone replaced bone, the memory of the Ice Age lingered, not as fear, but as wisdom. The earth remembered, and so did humanity, even when they no longer realized it. The patience learned from the cold, the gratitude born of scarcity, the humility found in silence, all these things continued, woven into the fabric of human nature. In the farthest places of the world, where ice still touched the mountains, travelers sometimes paused to listen. The wind there carried a different sound, low, steady, ancient. It was the same voice that once moved through the plains, whispering through the fur of mammoths, across frozen rivers, through the sleeping forests buried beneath snow. Those who stopped to listen often said they felt something, not sadness, but a gentle calm, as if the earth was sighing in remembrance. The rivers that had once been carved by glacier now ran freely, carrying with them particles of ancient ice ground to dust. Each droplet that reached the sea carried a memory of the frozen world. The oceans themselves, vast and deep, became the keepers of that history, their tides echoing the rhythm of glacial time. The whisper of the past was everywhere, in the wind, in the water, in the steady pulse of the planet that had endured and changed, again and again. The people of later generations sometimes found traces of those who had come before, tools buried in the soil, carvings in caves, fragments of shelter walls. When they touched them, they felt something beyond explanation. It was not curiosity alone, but reverence, the quiet realization that they were connected through time. They too were part of the same story, shaped by the same world that had once been locked in ice. And even those who never knew the Ice Age carried its lessons unknowingly in their hearts. They felt it in moments of stillness, when snow fell softly at night, when firelight flickered on stone walls, when silence stretched wide enough to hold thought. The cold had taught humanity not just how to survive, but how to be still, how to find meaning in calm and beauty in endurance. That wisdom, born from hardship, became eternal. Every sound of nature was part of that memory. The rustle of leaves in wind replaced the sigh of glacier. The drip of rain carried the same rhythm as melting ice. The laughter of children by rivers echoed the same tones once heard beside frozen lakes. Creation never truly forgot its earlier form. It only changed its song. The world had thawed, but it still carried the melody of the frozen age. Sometimes, in dreams, people still walked through those white plains. They saw the long shadows of mammoths, the soft dance of northern lights, the glow of distant fires flickering in the dark. They felt the familiar stillness, the same peace that had filled their ancestors' hearts. When they woke, they could not describe what they had seen, only that it felt like returning to something known, something ancient, something kind. The whisper of the past was never meant to haunt, but to remind that all life moves in cycles, that every ending carries a seed of renewal. Just as the cold had given way to warmth, so too would each trial give way to peace. Humanity learned that time is not a straight path, but a circle, one that brings back understanding when it is most needed. The earth's memory, quiet and eternal, became a teacher more faithful than any voice. There were moments when the wind itself felt like a memory, when it brushed against the face softly, carrying the scent of water, earth, and distant snow. In those moments, even the busiest heart could pause. The whisper of the past did not speak in words, but in feeling, a gentle reminder to slow down, to breathe, to remember that existence is ancient, and we are but one note in its long, unfolding song. The storytellers of later times kept this truth alive. Their voices echoed softly by candlelight, carrying the same calm tone as those who had once spoken beside fires of bone and stone. They did not seek to explain the past, only to keep it alive, as warmth is kept in embers. Their stories were bridges across centuries, connecting the frost of yesterday to the comfort of today. Every telling became an act of gratitude, gratitude for the ancestors who endured, for the world that reshaped itself, for the peace found in remembrance. The Ice Age, though gone, had given a gift that could not melt, the knowledge that endurance and kindness can outlast even the greatest cold. It was a truth written in snow, carried forward in spirit, and remembered in every spark of fire lit against the dark. Now, when the wind sighs across open fields, when snow falls softly on quiet nights, or when rivers hum beneath the moon, that same whisper returns. It moves unseen through the world, touching every heart willing to listen. It says, be patient, be kind, remember what has been and what will be. And so the story ends where it began, in stillness. The same stillness that once held the frozen earth, that still rests in the air after snowfall, that lives inside every breath taken with awareness. The cold may have passed, but its peace remains, waiting gently in the quiet places of the soul. Thank you for listening to this story, for walking softly through the frozen past and resting a while in its silence. May these whispers remind you that warmth and peace are always waiting, even in the coldest moments of life. May your night be calm, your breath slow, and your heart at ease. Sleep well, traveler of time, and may the echo of the ice keep you company, long after the fire fades.